Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Ready Player One. You know what? When I first saw the slapping of Warner Brothers on a movie, I ultimately groaned. I was like, oh my god, this is a Warner Brothers movie? Ugh. Like, I ultimately groaned, I ultimately moaned, and I'm like, oh great, how is this gonna be? How is this gonna be, like, how is this movie gonna feel so like cheap and so just like phoned in or whatever? How is it gonna be like how am I not gonna be happy about this film? But I ultimately watched this film, and ultimately the way I'd watch this film was for free, but ultimately I would not say for anyone to quite possibly use this source to be able to watch this movie, because the way I was watching it didn't have the best connection, and it seems like that seems to be like all throughout the way of everybody downloading this app. It just doesn't have the best connection. Like I could watch it, but it was like at like minutes per time. So it's like you'd watch it for like a minute and then it would buffer and then you'd watch it for like 30 seconds and then it would buffer. It was awful, but at least I finally got to say that I went out of my way to watch this film. So, how did I feel about this movie? How did I feel about Ready Player One? Well, this is a video game movie, and normally I would naysay and be very negative about film, but there is no way that I could go out of my way and do that for this review. There's no way. This movie has got to be the best video game movie I've ever seen in my life. Uh and this movie will probably end up being on the top 10 list of movies that I thoroughly enjoy, thoroughly love, thoroughly just go, oh my god, this was amazing. This was amazing. A lot of people could begrudgingly say that this movie has too much going on, it's all over the place, some of the stuff doesn't make sense, and blah 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 blah. Nitpick, nitpick, nitpick. This movie is amazing. This movie has so many Easter eggs and treasure troves. If this is a movie about Easter eggs, man, do they throw everything out there. But dare say, I sadly have to mention that with you slapping the word Warner Brothers on this movie, how Warner Brothers is divvying out their entire catalog into this movie, there honestly just seems to be some stuff that I have to be remiss and say that, like, I wish there was everything. I wish we could have had everything in here. I wish that we could have had like Disney stuff in here. I wish that we could have had any kind of like I wish we could have had like Terminators and all kinds of stuff. Like I wish that we could have had all everything. All everything all smashed into this movie. And man, would have been great. But looking at it, I was completely fine with them otherwise creating original stuff within this movie. Looking at it, like the amount of just treasure trovingly things that were put into this movie was good enough for me. Even though I would just like, man, but I wish there was just a little bit good enough. Good enough. I can't go out of my way to say much more than that. Because probably when looking at if I could have actually seen um like I don't think there would be any way to really actually um have done this movie and done it like maybe you can do like an animated movie of this to see like what it would have exactly looked like if Warner Brothers, if it would have been just more than one Warner Brothers. It would have been interesting to see the. I would have been more than willing to go and watch an animated movie of Ready Player One to see if the movie would have been slightly different at all, to have more stuff in it. I don't know, but I am completely happy and pleased about this. For people that have that would say, yeah, I've heard that this certain character is in this movie, or there's, well, I've seen the trailers and this certain thing is in the movie, blah 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 blah. There is not enough things that I can go out of my way and mention of how many things that I was like watching through this movie and seeing all the stuff that was like put through the Warner Brothers catalog that was inside this film, as well as them going out of their way to also try to incorporate some video game like stuff. Maybe not every single thing because Warner Brothers doesn't have like Disney budget to realistically like get all copyrights and all kinds of things. It's whoever really wants to plop into the money for this film. Like I'm sure there's certain there's probably a lot of certain game series and stuff like that that chipped in some money for this, and then their character was represented within this film. So I'm gonna kind of go and try to talk about this movie at first in a very cryptic like sense, which I don't know exactly how I can go about doing that. And then I'm gonna go into double five time territory and then go into spoilers if I haven't talked about this cryptically enough already. Um, this movie, it is kind of odd how they kind of have to get their information to be able to get to the next challenges of said game. It does kind of feel very interesting and or odd the stuff that is presented within this game, that ultimately you have an entire portion of said movie. How can I say this cryptically? Um, there's a part of said movie that can feel people heavily nostalgic about said other movie that someone did in the past. I guess that's how I can cryptically say it without actually saying it. Um, for those who love old fashioned films, get ready to get your old fashioned feels back with inside of you. Cause this movie really placates, or whatever you want to say it, to nostalgia people. It talks about 70s and 80s stuff. It kind of all over um, gives you a barrage of different kinds of people within this film. Yeah, I think I think that's probably about as much as I can like cryptically say without going out of my way to actually spoil this film. Um this movie does feel very video game like for how we've kind of adjusted through video games over the years, uh with there being, like, I think now when looking at it, like how heavily people used to love going into like race games, like racing games and stuff like that, and then there's also like a lot of movies that are eventually being adapted into video games. I think a lot of people love that now. It kind of goes through all kinds of, if people loved like the Ataris or the Nintendos or the maybe Segas or something like that, they kind of tip of the hat to that as well. to kind of make you feel very reminiscent of a game long since past, that ultimately would have some interesting knowledge going on within those games. Yeah, reasonably reasonably within this movie, uh with the live action stuff that was going along with this video game thing. um it was it was kind of interesting to see this entire time this live action chase that was going on. Once you saw a person of value, you had to run them down and find them and maybe try to snuff them out or gun them down, or all the while they're also in this video game world, trying to otherwise succeed where they need to succeed. Uh, you have this you have this corporate Goliath going up against this nobody in the video game world. You have it to where like you have two different kinds of like video game ease like people, where ultimately you have this rich guy that otherwise, like, yeah, he can throw money into this, but money will only get you so far. um all the while you have just this guy that is just smarter than anybody else, kind of really reads into things more than a lot of other people, and ultimately he is this person is putting so much more together than much more so than any other person. To me, this movie also kind of reminds me of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, bizarrely. When looking at it, it kind of gets to the aspect of the Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory if they already got into the factory. That's kind of how the movie starts. With them already being in the chocolate factory is kind of how the movie goes. Um, Looking at it, it is kind of funny that every single one of the people that I knew from this movie from other things, I rarely ever do really like them from anything else that they've ever really done. Simon Pegg, of course, I always love everything that he does. Um, the guy that plays the main character in this movie, I think ultimately he plays uh the in the Boy Scouts Guide to a Zombie Apocalypse, which I like that movie. But then he also did the X-Men films. uh we have two people in this movie that went and did some Marvel films that I ultimately didn't enjoy, but it seems like they are still, well, one of the characters is still going through and being a Marvel character in other things. Um, Anyways, so I think it's about that time to talk about this in spoiler terms, because knowing full well, it's super hard to talk about this movie cryptically, because there's a lot of funny aspects about this movie, or it's just me going, "Oh my god, I enjoyed that this character was in this movie, even though this person was in the background somewhere and was on screen for probably seconds." So, if you guys have not gone out of your way to find some way to watch Ready Player One, I would highly suggest to do so. I'm sure, considering this movie has been out for a while, there is probably a very cheap way to pay for this movie, whether it is to buy it outright or just eventually rent it somewhere for fairly cheap, or this and that. Because I'm assuming, I would have thought that this movie would, since it's Warner Brothers, I would assume that it would have been on like the HBO app, or it would have been like on the DC Universe thing, or some other Warner Brothers thing that they could have put this on here. But I guess not. So anyways, I think it's about that time to go into spoilers of how great this movie really is. Because yeah, I'm just cryptically saying that this movie is great, but I have nothing. There's no weight to what I'm saying. It's just like, yeah, it's really great, but I can't really say anything much more than that, which is sadly enough. Spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's that time again to talk about this film and go into spoilers. So, like I said, this is an amazing movie, and if people have not seen it, they really are missing out. Reasonably, the first thing that I really enjoy, because I always like to make jokes about it, I heard on some, like I Love the 70s or 80s VH1 thing, they went out of their way to talk about this pop called Tab. And every time I would mention, like, yeah, it would be great to eventually get this thing called Tab. It would be great to eventually drink it to just see, because like, evidently this was heavily popular during some point in time. Um, I think there was some way to actually go and actually get one of these things, but I just never really and truly did. But all because Tab still exists out there, folks. But ultimately, it was hilarious that a character actually brought up the pop tab, and I was like, oh my god, yeah, like this is really going after every nostalgic thing. But then ultimately, it kind of like spoke out to me because I'd always joke about like getting tab at some store somewhere, as a joke, um, knowing full well it probably is not the savory flavor of a new generation, I guess. But anyways, so there are a treasure trove of just honorable, mentionable things within this movie, either by reference or by actual visual aids, which is great. To kind of see in the beginning of this film, we have like Minecraft, and I'm like, oh, okay, so maybe Minecraft threw some couple bucks into this movie by slapping the Minecraft logo on there, and like, yeah, Minecraft. All right, good. Sadly enough, we didn't do anything with actually Minecraft. I was like, man, that's kind of a missed opportunity to just kind of like we could have done something with Minecraft, but I guess maybe that might have been too much of a challenge to really provide in this movie. But anyways, and plus it kind of would have been like a kind of like begrudging of time to really go into that. But anyways, so we have this thing called Oasis, this perfect place that I'm sure everybody would want to love to live if they were video game like people, because ultimately you could be anybody in this world as long as it falls into the Warner Brothers banner. Like God, how many things that I saw in this movie was just amazing. Just in like fighting scenes alone, or people just kind of walking into this environment. You have like freaking like RoboCop. You have like that I saw. You had like Jason fighting people. You had like Freddy Krueger, I think, consistently somewhere in this movie. You had uh, any number of different uh, like video game esh like things. You had Iron Giant that becomes a bigger part of this story. Uh, you have so many different like spawns and Mortal Kombat characters that consistently show up and this and that. You have a bunch of DC characters like right away they showcased Batman climbing a mountain, and so much effing more. But let's push on because I would take hours just like, oh my god, and this character and that, and ooh, yeah, ooh. So we go through this, and ultimately, there is this journey that these characters have to eventually go to consistently try to otherwise get to these Easter eggs or keys, I guess you could say. Um, to where, of course, in video games, you always have this rule of three. So, of course, these people need three keys. Like, there's always a rule of three in video games, so there had to have been three keys. Surefire enough. So, looking at it first, we have it to where, like, dare say, in this movie, we have this race that people are trying to figure out how to beat this race. But ultimately, you have like King Kong freaking like running around and kind of stopping people from finishing up this race. But surefire enough, like doing this race differently, let people win the race. Technicality, like evidently people going backwards really fast made it to where they won the race, beating everybody else. That was kind of fun, or that was just kind of funny. Just like, yeah, isn't there some kind of cheat way, or there's some kind of like cheat thing to do for a lot of games to just kind of beat it quicker, or is there kind of some kind of hack or some kind of this that you can do? And that is what people were starting to figure out. Um, Ultimately leading to a couple people getting the first key that Z, which I will call him because I like the main character, I'll just call him Z, or I'll just call him Wade Watts, because man, that name is just the actual name that he's given is just like bleh. And I'll call Artemis Artemis, and I'll call H and whenever stuff comes up. But anyways, it's interesting to see that I think people live and die off of video games in this world. Um, I think whatever these people were doing were all kind of tapping into this video game world. How people would spend real money in video games. I think you can get money from this video game, which was kind of very interesting. And then eventually, if you blew all of your money, your video game money into this video game, then you actually had no money, which was like it like to have a cornucopia or whatever you want to call it, a utopia or what, however you want to say this, of a video game world was very interesting to me, and how everybody was in these little like shit shacks or whatever you want to call them, because all that these people were doing were all tied into video game money. All that mattered was video game money. So looking at it, these housing areas made sense because for how goofy these housings were, it didn't really matter in reality, because looking at it, reality reality didn't matter to these people. The video game world did. To ultimately, the ultimate kind of thing at the very end of this movie was, hey, reality really matters. And so that's when you have these treasure troves at the very end of the movie in this guy's real life. But anyways, so within this movie, the very first thing is the race thing, which I thought was really fun. You ended up seeing like the Batmobile from the '66 Batman, which I was like, oh my god, that's amazing. And of course, you've of course saw the DeLorean, which of course the main character drove. The only thing is, like, I would have expected within this race to see like a lot more maybe duplicate esque, like cars or stuff like that. Because looking at it, like everybody would probably buy the exact same DLC or something like that. So you'd probably eventually see like a duplicate of something somewhere. But I guess not in this movie, which is completely fine. I like seeing one person only have one thing. That's kind of really cool. Um, looking at it, we have it to where after this race, I was just kind of like, okay, well, like that was interesting at all. I loved all the Easter eggs within the race, but like, there's got to be something more, right? There's got to be something more, and because like yeah, you kind of blew your load kind of early, but no, this movie keeps having more to give you, and I'm like, oh, okay, good, all right, interesting. So we go through this nostalgia, like walk through this guy's entire life, and how repetitiously there is one character consistently going through videos of this guy's entire life and kind of watching it and kind of tracking back to what is this guy's top 11 favorite films, what does he like to eat for snacks, like it's kind of weird how absurdly like this guy had spent and watched like videos over and over and over and over again about this guy's life. And ultimately, that was kind of odd, but then again, it really did help the story. It really did help you figure out how exactly a person could trick these things by watching a person's life, which was kind of it was kind of that odd kind of like wow, like this is a real smart thing to put in this movie. But I like it's kind of a very one of a kind like thing that it wouldn't work anywhere else but this situation, which was kind of interesting. You had it to where within the second part of this movie, that's when you had a movie inside of a movie. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. I'm like, what? I'm like, this is awesome. Like, you have a movie that everybody knows inside of a film that. And there's some of the, I guess you could say, players weren't aware of this movie at all. They've never seen it. And so they're just like, what am I going to get myself into? Because I've never seen this film before. It's like, is it a scary movie or what is this? It's awesome, man. Is it awesome to have people legitimately walking through the Shining house within this film, and ultimately kind of giving you a lot of stuff that actually happened in the film. They're bringing it back in this portion of this movie, and I was like, oh my god, this is amazing. This is amazing. And like looking at it, once people started to figure out where the keys were, eventually a lot of people started to tag along and try to figure this out and had a huge time doing it. um yeah, looking at this, how they had this company, this company going after these people and trying to buy them off and trying to buy their silence, or trying to eventually go after them and imprison them so they don't get further on into this game, kind of was almost kind of reminiscent of like a hackers s like movie. Which again, I kind of want to keep saying that like these characters feel like they're hacking the game, they're doing something wrong when actually they're doing the right thing. But it's just the fact that like people have deep pockets and people ultimately want to be the ones to win this whole thing, and they are so power hungry because they have the money to not let anybody else figure this stuff out, even though like everybody should have the possibility to be able to get a chance. um but it seems like at every way that this movie tends to go, it kind of stops them from doing that, even to the point of uh killing people, blowing up houses, and begrudgingly like tracking them down and trying to stop them or kill them or this and that, which creates a very interesting live action thing going on. It creates very much tension with this movie outside of what's going on in the game. But yeah, man, that whole Shining thing really blew me away. I was like, oh my god, we're having a movie inside of a movie. And of course, people who have seen this film would be very reminiscent about what all goes on in it. I'm like, oh my god, this is so iconic within this film, or oh my god, I remember this scene in this movie. And it is kind of hilarious how, when looking at it, they were trying to do some, let's just say, censoring stuff within this film, trying to make it kind of as PG-13 or whatever as possible. Because looking at it, there's a certain kind of thing that goes on into the Shining film of a lady in the shower that they definitely had to like try as much as possible to definitely try to like give people something, but then again also like, hey guys, like we gotta censor this. We gotta censor. So going into this, like after they get through The Shining, I was like, oh my god, this is like after like once we get into The Shining, I'm like, this movie is amazing. I don't care about anything else. This movie is great. But then they like kept on going. Um, and reasonably, we have it to where ultimately the guy who is the main villain, the main protagonist, I thought it was hilarious that the guy that otherwise is the villain in this film, his avatar in the video game looks just like Superman. Or it looks just like Clark Kent without glasses, but it looks just like Superman. I'm like, yeah, give me Superman as a villain in this movie. That is awesome. Or what I would interpret would be Superman, and someone else would interpret as just a video game s like character. But he looked just like Superman, so it was great. We have a lot of like DC comic book references. We have it to where the character has to disguise himself when he goes out in public. Because we have a Mortal Kombat character grabbing the guy and otherwise saying, "Hey, you're really popular," and dragging him into some secret place to ultimately tell him that it's like, "Oh, you need to get a disguise so you can otherwise fool people." And so ultimately, he grabs Clark Kent glasses and he changes his appearance barely. And then he puts on clothes that he wouldn't normally, so he can kind of go into incognito at certain points. So not everybody would bum rush him and whatever and try to like get him or get a piece of him or whatever. Anyways, so we have it to where, and like funny enough, we have so many like treasure trove like things being thrown out. Like we have like the alien s like creature coming out of the Mortal Kombat character's chest. And I was like, yeah, yeah, this movie is so much fun. Um, to where eventually we have to get there to be, if there wasn't like an all out Avengers like battle going on early in this film, for people to mad scramble to kill and shoot one another, while also showcasing like hundreds and hundreds of things. Um, we eventually get to an all out fight between the corporate people and just all the, let's just say, I guess, freelance players, all the just kind of normal Joe Schmo people that don't have any contract with any of these like this big corporate video game part of this movie. And we have an all-out battle between these people, um because the corporate company is coming up with uh trying to figure out all these keys as after somebody else does, and then eventually they're almost close to getting the last key, but and the corporate people are trying to get all these like magic spells and all this stuff to and shielding and everything like that to prevent people from getting to this last key, told me where they have to have this all-out war and do all these conniving or magical like things to kind of prevent this thing from happening. Or even one of the girl has to go undercover and bust this shield so eventually they can kind of go into this. And so ultimately, if we didn't have King Kong in this movie earlier, now we have Mecha Godzilla in this movie, which I thought was effing amazing. We have Iron Giant out there, as long as some Halo guys out there. We have Overwatch characters out there. We have, God, we had people shooting out of the Back to the Future DeLorean. We had all kinds of other probably video game references that I'm not probably very familiar with. We had rail guns and all this other stuff. Um, we had, God, just a bunch of stuff just going on with within this environment. And I'm not a video game expertise, just like kind of notched through everything, but good God, was it amazing. Just amazing. Um, to ultimately see that this movie and its equivalent kind of feeling like a Lego movie. This is kind of like a very much better variation of a Lego movie because it actually feels not to downplay a Lego movie, but it's not like Lego movies are what they are. This movie is what it is. Um so yeah, we have what I would say Superman being a villain in this movie, going after people in his Mecha Godzilla, and everybody is trying to, in desperation, take everybody out. We have all kinds of war and stuff going out. We even have it to where people are trying to give people better weapons and stuff like that. Ultimately, leading to one of the weapons ends up being pure and simple Chucky from Child's Play. Somebody has to throw Chucky at some person for them to take Chucky from Child's Play and chuck it at the evildoers, and they're like, "It's mother effing Chucky!" And then it's like, "Whoa!" what a what a funny scene that was. Oh man, just the overall just craziness that everything was in this movie. I probably would have to watch this several times over to see newer things, fresher things, and especially it would be better to watch this in a Blu-ray like way because I don't think I'm gonna be able to like watch it in a DVD like way and have it like really I can see everything clearly and this and that. So yeah, in a very high definition way where it's not a computer on a computer because high definition can only go so far. Uh on like a computer or something like that. Like this movie probably wouldn't work for a computer. It would have to be like you'd have to watch it on Blu-ray. But anyways, um, going into this, eventually Mecha Godzilla gets taken down, with the help of Iron Giant and a number of other different things. Um, eventually getting to the point of these people still have to get to this key and figure out the Easter egg of the very first video game that has ever done a Easter egg ever before. You would think that somebody would have it in the history books. What was the video game that had the very first Easter egg? Because this is what this movie is about. It's all about Easter eggs. So you would have thought that somebody would have tried the very first game and known what the Easter egg is of that game, but evidently nobody thought about what it was. But it was a great way to end this film. But ultimately, it turns into very much Willy Wonka esque like thing, where like at first it's kind of funny that you had, or before we get to the win or whatever, we have to where like everybody's lives in the game is ultimately wiped out. Like somebody had like a very nuclear option, so that way no one could play the game. Because ultimately, if they probably figured, well, Rich Miser has still so much money and whatever, like ultimately for him, like he can quickly get through the game because of all much for so much money he has. But yeah, looking at it, um, we had a character that had a one up, that had an extra life. If anything is very retro about video games, is you getting an extra life in a lot of Nintendo games or stuff like that, which ultimately had a very interesting way of how this person got the extra life, which was like, oh my god, like there's a way to like market this thing and have this one specific thing be like given out to people, and this and that would be heavily awesome. But anyways, so we have it within this movie that a guy gets an extra life, which of course was a quarter, and I was like, man, this is awesome. Like really just pulling at the heartstrings of nostalgia for just every single like every single thing to do with video games just on down. Just everything that they could possibly put into this was put into this. So much thought process was put into this what was originally a book. So we go into this, and ultimately we have it to where they solve the Easter egg, and the guy is ultimately like talking to the actual developer as like a ghost in the machine. Because ultimately he's trying to, like, the kid is actually asking like the guy if, like, what are you? Did you like download your entire like consciousness into the game? What is going on? And there is no answer there, which is perfect. Um, we have it to where also there's a chase scene going on. There's like a car chase scene going on, and this guy is kind of like shuffling through this car and having a severely hard time trying to finish up what he's supposed to finish up, be and kind of reminisce into a lot of the old or some of the video games that like were super hard for controls, and you couldn't quite get things just right. You had to have a like multiple attempts to try to get this simple thing done, and people just be like, good god, this is taking forever. This is taking forever to get this simple thing in here. Like, good god, come on. um Very reminiscent of a lot of old games as well, because of how crappy some controls were. But this guy otherwise was in a car while there was a high speed chase going on and a lot of other things, while also trying to finish up this video game. So there's kind of two stories in one throughout this entire movie. You have a guy that otherwise loses out on his parents and ultimately is seeking revenge, trying to go up against this company that is otherwise just trying to tell him everything that he thinks he wants to hear. And this guy is not sincere. He's just like, money, money, money. Like, I just want this key, and whoever I have to get to this key, that's what I'm going to do. To where there's so much conflict that these people in game or out game have to just consistently just like fight with one another, to where this guy has to seek secrecy, because again, like, it feels like this character is like hacking the game, and the game developer is going after this person because it's like, oh, excuse me, oh, no, 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 you shouldn't be doing this, you shouldn't be hacking this game, you shouldn't be figuring out all the clues, um this and that, which is again very interesting. It's very like hacker-esque. Why not just simply ban a person from a game or whatever? uh Quick way to resolve that. But anyways, you get it to where again this guy is talking to, I guess, the creator of this game, the creator of Oasis, and this guy otherwise has the opportunity of completely being able to have complete control of Oasis, ultimately to getting this bizarrish gold like Easter egg that ultimately, when the big old villain gets to chase after the guy in the car, otherwise finally otherwise noticing that he has the Easter egg, he just kind of gives up, because it's like, well, hey, like, I tried and I lost. If anything, if I were to have tried to like do something with this character, do something with Wade, or try, it just won't work. It just, like, I just have to cope with losing, and ultimately a lot of cops could cope with him going into jail as well. But ultimately, you have it in a very Willy Wonka like fashion, where the character has to sign on the dotted line, and this guy knows so much about this developer that it's like, well, no, that's not the right decision to make. Um, like, I'm not gonna just sign away my life. And the the cloak man, or whatever you want to say, the old man cloak, it's like, yeah, that's the right decision. And then kind of further on, eventually gives him like everything that he could want, and this and that, to where ultimately It ends up being Simon Pegg or Og or Og or whatever. He ends up coming in and like giving all these people signed contracts to be able to own Oasis and do whatever they want with it. And like surefire enough, like the guy, even though he won, he kind of like spreads the wealth with um, all of his other people in the video game, because ultimately he's just like, well, like I didn't do this alone. I did this with the help of a number of people, which is really great. Yeah, I really liked that ending. It really was, and to ultimately see that Simon Pegg was actually the guy the whole entire time helping the main character out, helping Z out, was kind of interesting with that extra life thing, kind of helping this guy out in the way of like this guy is really spending a lot of time trying to figure this stuff out, where anybody else would have not taken the time like he did. So let's since we know that he's gonna do this, yeah, like let's give him a leg up, which was great. But yeah, ultimately retying that guy back into the company as some kind of consultant, but he only was gonna want a quarter per quarter or whatever, which is kind of really fun. But anyways, yeah. So this movie was amazingly great, and at the end of the day, I think that's all I could say about the movie. Uh, it won me over in all the right possible ways that it could. Um, like this is a great video game, better than I think any other video game that I've seen. Kind of pretty much after that, like any video game thing that's kind of after that, like I know the movie Stay Alive is a really good video game that kind of also mixes in horror. I think kind of after this movie, it'd probably be like that movie Stay Alive, where it's like you die in the game, you die for real, and then kind of after that would be any kind of like movies that were adapted from probably previous video games, like maybe the Hitman movies or Prince of Persia or something along those lines. Very few times there are very good video game stuff that are adapted. Maybe some people might say Pixels at some point or whatever. Or maybe Wreck It Ralph, because that's technically a video game movie. But yeah, that's all I have to say about a video game movie. But I'm going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, everybody.